This is The World This Weekend. Hello, I'm Stephanie Skandaris. Coming up, the Israeli military promises an investigation into how 3 hostages were mistakenly shot by its soldiers.
It's unacceptable what happened. It's clear that this was a tragic error. If soldiers broke the rules of engagement, there has to be action taken.
Also, the family of a mentally ill man who died while in jail holds one more vigil after finally getting closure.
I felt like Solomon was heard and seen for the first time in 7 years.
And from the streets of the Bronx to the Paris Olympics, breaking gets set for its Summer Games debut.
Even though sometimes we don't share the same language, we speak the same language when we dance.
That's later, but first. Israel's military has admitted that 3 hostages who were shot dead by its troops in Gaza were waving a white flag. That revelation has sparked outrage in Israel. In a nationwide address, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said he was distressed by the killings, but insisted there would be no change in Israel's intensive military campaign. Meanwhile, in a war that has been deadly for journalists, a funeral has been held for an Al Jazeera cameraman killed in an Israeli airstrike. Chris Reyes has the details.
Israel is in an existential war with Hamas, said Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu in an extensive news conference. He added that the war must be fought until victory despite the pressure and costs. His comments come after the Israeli Defense Force released new details over 3 hostages killed in Gaza by Israeli soldiers. According to the IDF's investigation, the hostages were dressed in civilian clothes and waving a white flag. Israeli Army Chief Herzi Halevi said he and the IDF are responsible for what happened and will do everything to prevent such incidents again, adding that the shooting was carried out during combat and under pressure. The IDF report concluded that the soldiers involved in the shooting did not follow IDF's own rules of engagement. Mark Regev is a former Israeli ambassador to the UK, now advisor to Netanyahu.
It's unacceptable what happened. It's clear that this was a tragic error by our forces. One of the problems we face is, of course, that Hamas don't wear uniforms. They wear civilian clothes. They are terrorists.
In Tel Aviv, thousands gathered under banners that said time is running out. Many are angry over those new details and want the Netanyahu government to strike a deal to get hostages back. Ruby Chen is the father of one of the hostages still being held in Gaza.
The Israeli government needs to be active. They need to put an offer on the table, including prisoners with blood on their hands.
Another protester, Gori Parnes, said a deal should have been done much earlier.
And all those lives of all the innocent people could have been spared. I think it's a big tragedy what's happening here now.
In Gaza, where it's another day of death and destruction, a heartbreaking example of the war toll. A press flak jacket laid out at the funeral service of Al Jazeera journalist Abu Daka, who was killed while doing his job. Dr. Mustafa Barghouti is a member of the Palestinian parliament.
How many more people should die? I think the solution is not the continuation of this terrible war, which will take lives of Palestinians as well as Israelis, but to stop the war.
At today's briefing, Netanyahu said after Hamas's defeat, Gaza will be demilitarized and under Israeli control. Netanyahu said Israel will not be acting on requests for a ceasefire and removal of troops in Gaza. Chris Reyes, CBC News, New York.
An Ottawa youth is facing terrorism-related charges stemming from an alleged threat against the Jewish community. The youth, who cannot be identified because of their age, was arrested Friday. There are few details at this time, but the RCMP says the youth was charged with 2 offenses under the criminal code, including that they communicated instructional documents regarding an explosive substance and that they knowingly instructed someone to carry out terrorist activity against Jewish people. CBC News will bring you all the latest updates as this story develops. In downtown Toronto tonight, a public vigil will honour Suleiman Fakiri. Fakiri died 7 years ago after a violent struggle with correctional officers inside an Ontario jail. A coroner's inquest has now deemed his death a homicide. Fakiri's family has held a vigil every December since his death. As Philip Lee Shannock reports, they say after years of fighting for accountability and justice, the findings of the coroner's inquest gives them some closure.
Today is the 7-year anniversary of Salman Fakiri's tragic death.
Yosef Fakiri shared video from his brother's graveside in Ajax, just east of Toronto.
As I come to give my salutations to my beloved brother, I wanted to let Suleiman know that the inquest into his tragic death was a homicide verdict.
Suleiman Fakiri died in 2016 after guards at a secure facility in Lindsay, Ontario, beat, shackled, and pepper sprayed him, then left him face down with a hood over his head on the floor of his cell. A coroner's inquest this week ruled his death a homicide.
Solomon, come here and speak to me, please.
Days before his death, a concerned corrections officer, Sergeant Clark Moss, recorded a video hoping to bring attention to Fakiri's mental deterioration. An agitated Fakiri is seen naked in a cell covered in feces and vomit.
He's not responding. I'm going to try to get him out and get him cleaned up.
Moss was not on duty the day Fakiri died, shortly after he was taken for a shower. The inquest jury found that guards broke dozens of rules and that staff at the facility knew Fakiri was in crisis but never sent him to a hospital. Ontario's chief forensic pathologist testified Fakiri sustained injuries that created a perfect storm for his death. Yosef Fakiri says the verdict of homicide, after years of his death being called an accident, brought relief.
He's not coming back and we have not received justice, but just maybe this might be an opportunity for us to change the system.
The union representing correctional workers says Fakiri's death was accidental. Suleiman Fakiri was facing charges of assault and uttering threats. He was held for 11 days while awaiting a mental health assessment. His brother says the fact that there was no bed for him in an appropriate facility cost him his life.
People with mental illness should not be in jails. They should be in institutions with social workers, with psychiatrists, with mental health nurses. Sully shouldn't have been there. That's the biggest tragedy out of all this.
The inquest made 57 recommendations to improve conditions for prisoners experiencing a mental health crisis. Howard Sapers is a former correctional investigator and an independent advisor on correctional reform.
Everyone who came in contact with Mr. Fakiri recognized his illness. And even with that, the system was incapable of getting him into safer circumstances.
And he says many of the inquest's recommendations about not leaving mentally ill inmates segregated in isolation cells have been made before. Still, Yosef Fakiri says the family now has answers.
My mother asked me 7 years ago to find out what happened to her son, and I certainly hope that my promise was met.
And while the coroner's inquest can't assign blame, Fakiri would like guards at the facility to face criminal charges for his brother's death. Philip Lee Shannock, CBC News, Toronto.
The RCMP in Newfoundland and Labrador has laid charges in a 7-year-old cold case. Dean Penny has been charged with the murder of his estranged wife, Jennifer Hillier Penny. Hillier Penny went missing in November 2016. She was last seen going to Penny's house to watch their daughter while he went hunting. Tracy Edwards is with the Newfoundland RCMP.
7 years of investigative diligence has brought us to this point. From the beginning, our goal has been to get answers for Jennifer's loved ones and to bring anyone responsible for her disappearance to justice.
Hillier Penny's body has not been found, but the RCMP says it has sufficient evidence to support the murder charge. Well, for Canadians trying to escape the high cost of living, Alberta has become an attractive destination. But as Alberta's population grows rapidly, economists say people going there for cheaper housing could soon be met with sticker shock. Sam Sampson explains.
Edmonton streets are a bit busier these days thanks to Alberta's recent population surge. But it's not the crowds that throw off Cindy Soriel.
All the streets are numbered, so that was a big change for me.
But Soriel was willing to adjust for Edmonton's housing costs. She, her husband, and their 8-year-old daughter went from renting a basement apartment in Mississauga to a 3-bedroom house with a yard.
If you took this house and put it in Mississauga, or basically almost anywhere in Ontario, it would be at least $3,500. We're paying $1,600.
More than 56,000 people have moved to Alberta recently from other provinces, most of them Ontario and BC. As interprovincial migration continues, albeit at slower rates, Suriel and even lifelong Albertans worry that pattern will drive up the cost of everything.
Because if it ends up being like Ontario, we're going to have to flee again.
Economists are dissecting what Canadians might face in 2024 after a year of brutal inflation and interest rate hikes. ATB Financial predicts Alberta's equation will be a positive one, in part due to its major population growth. Alberta is now growing faster than any province since records began. But more people means more demand on resources, like housing. Mark Parsons is ATB's chief economist.
Says, Calgary's housing market tightens and prices go up. We could see other parts of the province also see higher rents and prices.
As Alberta's population grows at a record pace, Royal LePage predicts so too will home prices in Calgary. Houses there will see the biggest price increase in Canada, reaching more than $800,000 next year.
And housing, as I mentioned, is still relatively affordable. It's emphasized on relative, but it is a key driver of why a lot of people are coming.
Those in the housing industry say they've already got the jump on flocks of home buyers. Housing starts, or new builds, are up in Calgary. Scott Fash is the CEO for the Building Industry and Land Development Association of Alberta.
I think Calgary is going to shatter last year's start record, which was a record in Calgary the year before that.
Things are slower than they'd like due to a labor shortage in land development, like installing water lines. As home buyers in Calgary face higher prices, Edmonton sees more pressure in the rental market. Fash says they're building those as fast as they can.
We know that that's where the pressure is really being felt right now, and that stuff is coming. It is coming, and I know that, again, doesn't give somebody who's dealing with it on a day-to-day basis a ton of solace at this moment, but that product is getting built.
Royal LePage expects population growth to push Edmonton's housing costs up, like in Calgary. But former Ontarian Suriel says it's still cheaper than what she'd face back home.
I've always just dreamed of living comfortably and being okay with my family being okay, and I just would never have been able to do that over there. Never.
The fear of affordability still lives in the back of Suriel's mind, as does her anger with governments and banks that she says forced her to leave Ontario in the first place. Sam Sampson, CBC News, Edmonton.
A sixth person has died as a result of a salmonella outbreak linked to cantaloupes. Canada's Public Health Agency says more than 150 cases have been confirmed across 8 provinces. On Friday, Mexico's health department temporarily closed the melon packing plant connected to the contaminated fruit. Canadians are being warned not to buy, eat, or sell Malachita or Ruby brand cantaloupes. Any fruit where the brand is unclear should be thrown out. Elon Musk and British Prime Minister Rishi Sunak were among the guests at a political festival in Italy celebrating the country's conservative youth and organized by Italy's controversial right-wing Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni. Her party, the Brothers of Italy, has its roots in the country's fascist movement. Megan Williams tells us what brought them together.
It was all mulled wine, porchetta sandwiches, elves, and hard lines against migrants here at the Welcome Back Italian Pride Festival in Rome's historic Castel Sant'Angelo. The right-wing festival was launched 25 years ago by the then young post-fascist activist Giorgia Meloni, now Italy's leader. It takes its name, Atreyu, from one of Meloni's favorite movies, the dark fantasy The Never-Ending Story. Her own story with British Prime Minister Rishi Sunak seems to be just getting going.
Please help me saying, welcome Rishi to Atreyu 2023.
The two conservative politicians have become besties over their anti-migrant stance, hugging warmly, with Sunak praising Meloni for her role in trying to overhaul global refugee rules. Last month, she made a controversial pact with Albania to set up migrant detention centers for people rescued in the Mediterranean, trying to make it here to Italy.
Criminal gangs will find ever cheaper ways to ply their evil trade. They will exploit our humanity, and they think nothing of putting people's lives at risk when they put them in these boats at sea.
Sunak told a jubilant crowd.
Our enemies will also see that we are unable to deal with this, and then they will so increasingly use migration as a weapon, deliberately driving people to our shores to try to destabilize our societies.
Elon Musk, who got to know Maloney during a visit here in June, also spoke at the festival today, contradicting the majority of the world's scientists by saying the danger of climate change in the medium term is exaggerated. He also addressed Italy's demographic crisis.
That I do worry about the low birth rate, and you know, if a company is to invest in Italy, they're like, well, you have to say, like, will there be enough people to work there?
Saying in this country, with soaring youth unemployment and scarce economic prospects, Italians should have more children.
As simple as it sounds, if people do not have children, there is no new generation.
A so-called pro-family proposal Maloney, a single mother of one child, is also promoting. But like the never-ending story, it's a policy, say experts, whose results are more fantasy than real. Megan Williams, CBC News, Rome.
A Vatican criminal court has convicted a prominent cardinal on charges of embezzlement and abuse of office. Cardinal Angelo Becciu is the most senior Catholic Church official to stand trial for financial crimes. The case was centered around the purchase of a building in London by the Vatican's key administrative department. The eventual sale of the building lost the Vatican over $200 million. Becciu has been sentenced to 5.5 years in prison. His lawyer says he will appeal and maintains his innocence. Voters in Chile will decide tomorrow whether to approve or reject a new constitution for the second time in just over a year. It would replace the one implemented during the dictatorship of Augusto Pinochet. But the process has been highly divided between people on the left and right. And as Marie-Armelle Lafourie reports, it probably won't end with tomorrow's vote.
It was widespread unrest in Chile that led to the demand for a new constitution 4 years ago, one that would address the country's many social inequalities. The first attempt was written by a body dominated by the left. That draft was considered one of the most progressive in the world and included proposals such as gender parity in public institutions and stronger environmental protections. Elisa Loncón is a member of the Mapuche, the largest indigenous group in Chile, and presided over that assembly.
Una nación distinta a la chilena.
She says it would have recognized several nations within Chile, but a majority of Chileans thought the text was too radical and rejected it with a large majority. A new process began. This time voters elected a constituent assembly led by the far right, a group that never wanted to change the constitution in the first place. Its proposal will entrench private education, private health care, and private pensions that already exist in the country. The campaign against this new draft says it would be a major setback for indigenous and women's rights. Loncón says she will vote against it.
Nuestro derecho no es tan reconocido.
Our rights aren't recognized, she says, so we cannot vote for it.
Chile, vota a favor.
On the right, the campaign has been framed as critical of the current leftist president, Gabriel Boric. Those in favor want voters to approve the new constitution so the country can move on and address more pressing issues, such as an increase in violent crime and a surge in illegal immigration. Here's far-right leader José Antonio Cast in his ad campaign.
Yo voy a votar a favor. Y le pido a los chilenos que
vote in favor to end the uncertainty and close the debate once and for all, he says. But experts say there's little chance the process will end here. Maria Cristina Escudero teaches politics at the Universidad de Chile. She says both attempts have failed to reach a broad consensus, so debate will continue whatever the result of the vote. Her colleague Robert Funk agrees.
Even if it's approved, a lot of Chileans will feel that, again, this constitution was imposed, even though it was done in democracy, but it was imposed by one political sector, and it doesn't reflect a kind of political, social contract that a country needs to kind of move forward.
As for the result, Funk believes voter fatigue will play a role.
If enough people think that by accepting the new proposal, this process will finally be over, then obviously they will favor the new constitution.
According to Funk, the great irony of tomorrow's vote is that the people who have fought for a new constitution for years are now voting to keep the existing one in place. And the people who never wanted a new constitution are campaigning for a new one. Marie-Armelle Laforêt for CBC News, Santiago.
Philip Kim will be making history as the first Canadian b-boy to compete in the Olympic Games this summer in Paris. He officially qualified after winning the gold for breakdancing, or breaking as it's actually called, at the Pan Am Games in Chile. He only gets one shot at Olympic glory because breaking won't be featured in the 2028 Games in Los Angeles. But as Michelle Song explains, this moment is about more than just a medal.
This is history in the making for breaking going into the Olympics.
Philip Kim, best known as Phil Wizard, will be the first Canadian to compete for the men's breaking category in the Olympics next summer. For him, this is a chance to inspire the next generation.
When kids see breaking, when parents of those kids see breaking on TV, on the Olympic platforms, and they say, "Mom, Dad, I want to do that," and I think the narrative then changes from really breaking to yes, go for it because it's an Olympic sport, because they see this clear pathway and this respected kind of platform that it's on.
For the older generation of b-boys like Stephen Leaflor, Kim is carrying on a legacy of breaking in Canada.
He's earned it. Now, that being said, he's standing on the shoulders of, even if you look in Canada, of 40 years of street dancing history.
Leaflor's stage name is Buddha. His dance crew, the Canadian Floor Masters, was one of the first of its kind. He says breaking creates a sense of community.
The concept of a crew in the early days meant everything. You knew we had each other's back.
With the combination of footwork, acrobatics, and musicality, breaking is more than just a form of dance. It started in the 70s on the streets of the Bronx as a pillar of hip-hop culture, with Black and Latino youth from low-income families coming together to express themselves during tough times.
It makes sense that it came out of a place like the Bronx. And yet, kind of like a flower that grows up through a crack in the concrete, something came. And then now it's this international thing. Now people of all walks of life are involved.
Over time, the dance gained international popularity, even reaching b-boy Jer Kizan in Manila back in the 80s.
Even though sometimes we don't share the same language, we speak the same language when we dance.
Kizan introduced Kim to b-boying when he was young and still teaches it to young people in Vancouver.
I know, it was something about the music and something about the culture that really kind of inspired me and made me want to do that. And to this day, I'm happy that I'm still able to teach it.
Kim won gold at the Pan Am Games in November. He's now got his sights set on the Olympic podium, and he doesn't take this moment lightly.
To see how far it's come, to be on one of the most recognized platforms on the world competitively as one of the most respected events in the world, because to be an Olympic athlete in itself is an incredible honor.
Michelle Song, CBC News, Toronto.
Respect. You're listening to The World This Weekend on CBC Radio. I'm Stephanie Skandaris. The 1980s and 90s were the heyday of the erotic thriller. Movies like Fatal Attraction and Basic Instinct ruled the box office. But since then, depictions of sex on screen have plummeted. The steamy new movie Poor Things is getting rave reviews and awards attention. But as Eli Glasner tells us, it's an exception.
Hi. Mind if I touch your wiener?
What?
Your dog.
Looking back at 2023, there's been no lack of sex and steamy moments at the movies. From the comedy No Hard Feelings to the dance floor drama of Magic Mike's Last Dance.
And gave me these unexpected, magical moments.
Or the heartbreaking gay love story All of Us Strangers. And then there's Poor Things.
Why do people not do this all the time?
Which finds Emma Stone on a sensual journey. But increasingly, movies with sex scenes are the exception. According to a study of the Internet Movie Database, between 2010 and 2020, on-screen sex dropped to the lowest levels since the 60s. A recent UCLA study offers a clue why. It found nearly half of those aged 13 to 24 said sex in TV and film is unnecessary and romance overused. Gabrielle Drolet is a Gen Z writer and cartoonist.
As soon as sex comes up, that becomes a really big, complicated issue.
She wonders if shows like HBO's The Idol are part of the turnoff.
Thank you. There were so many sex scenes that, yeah, exactly, that were so, like, gratuitous and grotesque almost and unnecessary.
And then there's this, too, from the survey.
51% want more friendships and platonic relationships. Now, I'm surprised. How surprised are you?
Not very.
Stacey Lee Kong is a pop culture writer and the editor of Friday Things. She attributes part of this to isolation.
We had the pandemic, which was all loneliness, all the time. Pretty terrible. I don't know if you remember.
She says young people want their media to model healthy relationships.
I think when we talk about it as like this Puritan idea of the youth are so conservative, the youth don't like sex. But I don't think it's as much about that as it is for what you're saying, this hunger for community.
I do sexual things, but not like yet.
The upcoming Canadian film Fitting In certainly has sex on the brain. Director Molly McGlynn was excited to watch Emma Stone in Poor Things.
Just seeing a woman wanting or rejecting very shamelessly.
She thinks rejecting assumptions is what Gen Z is doing.
They have, I think, thankfully been able to question whether a romantic or sexual relationship is the be-all, end-all that we have been sold.
We must experience everything.
Despite that, many creators hope movies will remain a safe place to explore what sex can mean. Eli Glaster, CBC News, Toronto.
My bad habits lead to late nights and alone.
Gen Z is rejecting not just sex scenes in movies, but also some of the habits that were big with previous generations, including drinking a lot of alcohol. Numerous studies have shown people born from the late 90s on are a more sober, curious generation than the one before. A 2020 report from Berenberg Research found Gen Z drinks 20% less than millennials. You'll certainly find fewer references to drinking in Gen Z songs compared to classic millennial music.
Okay, we poppin' champagne like we won a championship game. Shots, 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 shots. Everybody in the club get tipsy.
But not everybody at the club is getting tipsy anymore. And even millennial Adele, who released the song I Drink Wine in 2021,
Now I only soak up wine.
now says she's quit drinking. There are more low and no alcohol options than ever, and sales of them are on the rise. And it's what people are looking for when they go out, too. The restaurant reservation service Open Table has found that 51% of younger Canadians say it's important that restaurants offer mocktail options. But that's leading to a few problems for alcohol sellers.
Champagne problems.
Notably in France, where sales of champagne dropped by 21% this year. The rise of health-conscious sobriety may have something to do with it, but it also comes down to cold, hard cash. Champagne is just too expensive for a lot of people now. And in France, sales of cheaper alternatives like Prosecco have risen by almost 9.6%. But you know what? No one's making songs about Prosecco.
In a champagne supernova in the sky.
So we'll leave you with something Gen Z is into, 90s nostalgia. This is Oasis with Champagne Supernova on The World This Weekend. I'm Stephanie Skenderis. Thanks for listening.
Wake up the dawn.